Well, thank you so much for coming tonight. I wanted to thank South Dakota Art Museum for bringing the show to South Dakota, Brookings, South Dakota. This show was first exhibited in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, actually exactly a year ago. And we're just thrilled to share our work with you. So this the show in Milwaukee I curated, and for the South Dakota Art Museum, the show is curated but with John Schuerman, and due to kind of unforeseen circumstance, he is not able to join us. So I will try to represent as well as I can. But I'm also very happy that two of the artists in the show were able to come and join me, and we'll all take turns in talking about our own work, as well as the artists who are not here today. So when trees dream, do trees dream, right? We dream. So one morning, I was working on a project. Oops, I need my keyboard here. Oops, got it. I was working on a project, and I was having a conversation with my husband about trees. And we started saying, oh, do trees talk to each other? Well, probably so. We just speak different language, but I'm sure they talk to each other. So then said, oh, I wonder if trees dream, and what do they dream about? And if they do dream, we share our dreams, right? We get up in the morning and say, wow, I dreamt something strange or something terrifying or something, and go, well, if trees do dream, do they share? And so we kind of thought, I'm sure they do, just like us. So that's how the title of the show, When Trees Dream, came about. So if trees dream like we do, what do they want us to know? And what are they telling us? I'm going to read you two quotes. If a tree falls in the forest, there are other trees listening. This is because a tree can be only as strong as the forest that surrounds it. So these are the two quotes from The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wohlleben. So this show, When Trees Dream, is as much about trees as it is about community. It is about us. It's a community of friends and community of artists who share the common dreams. So it's John Schuerman is on the right. So in 2019, pre-pandemic, seems like a long time ago. Yes, I was working on a reliquary project around that time. And then I had worked in a show at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. So I went to for the show reception. And during that trip, John asked me that he has an idea that he wanted to share with me, a collaborative idea, project idea that he wanted to share with me. So I said, oh, that sounds interesting. And so he knew of my work, and John Schuerman is an artist, but also has worked as curators of many shows. And I was lucky enough to be in a few of his shows that he curated. So he knew of my work and my interest, in using hand coil paper. So we met in his studio and we talked about our kind of meditative nature of our studio practice. And also we talked about how we both appreciate slowness. And that slow process that gives us time to reflect and to think. And then he also talked about at that time that he was doing his walking project and how the walking allowed him to really slow down because we drive in a car, moving really fast. And the walking made him really think and pay attention to all the things that he would see. And we also talked how we both saw nature and the natural elements as our teachers. So we agreed that we would find a way to combine all of our interests and in some kind of a joint collaborative project. So during that studio visit, we began the project, and so did our friendship. And during that same trip, I was introduced to Marjorie, who had worked at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. And it was exhibited in the lobby, and it just drew me in. It was just a stunning piece. So Marjorie and I, underneath her piece on a bench, spent hours talking. We shared everything. Someone I had never met before. In a few hours, we just talked about our past, current life, about paper making. So from art to history to life, we just shared everything. And since then, we stay connected. So needless to say, that was a very, very good trip. So I'm gonna talk to you a bit about the show Reliquary, the installation piece that's in the show. And 3 of us are going to take turns. So the artists who are not able to come to Brookings, I asked them to send a conversational script. So we will take turns and read their script as if they were here in their own voice. So this is a reliquary piece. And so Milwaukee is right along the side of Lake Michigan. And one late summer, I went to this beach called Clotes Beach, Clotes Park in Whitefish Bay, which is north of the city of Milwaukee. And there I saw all these piles of driftwood that particular year, and just the way that the beach is situated. So there were just these piles. And at a first glance, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of stuff here, right? You go there for a nice, clean beach and you see these piles. And then when you start looking closely, I began to see all these wonderful forms that these branches kind of presented. So I started picking and looking through the forms that were formed by the water that, the tree that fell and probably they got swollen, waterlogged, and then shrank and twisted, and all these, crevices and holes and scratches and all of those forms. And And I was immediately drawn to these shapes. To me, they were the remains of some trees from somewhere near Lake Michigan. A friend told me a lot of trees get washed away are coming from Canada. So it traveled a long way before they got to this beach. So these trees, once rooted in the ground, hopefully and possibly thriving, but for reasons we do not quite know, fell into the lake, a storm, just like all those trees that fell this summer in Brookings. We don't know how long or how far they were in the water. Water completely washed them, and the tree form broke down to pieces. Their shapes bent, twisted. I felt like these trees shared the same story as my own. As an immigrant, I fell into this land called the United States that I call home. And as a living being, my journey is taking me here and there, get washed, stripped bare, twisted and turned. So I imagine the remnants of these bones on the beach will slowly begin to disintegrate and will return to its real home, and that is Earth. So I brought the bundle back to the studio. I cleaned them and I began wrapping them with the hand coil paper that I make. It was a gesture to dress them up. And in a way, as a final send-off. Hand coiling first, and then I use the coils to wrap them up, are very slow process. I have a lot of time to feel and touch every cuts and textures of each piece. As I'm doing this, I was imagining the life of this particular tree that this branch belonged to. And I was thinking, only if I could understand what this tree's life has been. So I kept cleaning up, coiling, and then resulted in this installation with 2 video projection. The one video shows the outside where these trees came from, and then the other side of the video shows the process of me cleaning, coiling, and wrapping. So my interest in trees and the life cycle of trees, or the story that these trees tell me, though I don't understand their language, kept me interested. So I'm going to show you just a couple pieces of my most recent work with mesquite tree, or tree disc, crosscut of mesquite tree. So I took mesquite tree discs and I would raise the grain, I would polish it, sand it, raise the grain, and then I combine the prints from those tree discs with hand coiled and sometimes with the objects, the natural elements that I would find. So as we all know that tree rings indicate time, and also how the ring is formed indicate what year, what temperature, what kind of what things happen during that year. I'm not a tree expert, so I would not know it, but it's recording that time, that particular year. And for me, just working with these forms is my way of connecting with what they've gone through. The one on the left is an installation that I did based on the wildfire. It's called Bighorn Fire in Tucson, Arizona, where I spent some time. And in front of our house, in the whole 2 months, June and July, wildfire was just happening and just glowing red all night. And I think 120,000 acres of the Catalina Mountains were burned. And a year later, this year, we went back to the burn site and I collected some tree remains and I brought them home. They were covered in soot, dirt, and I cleaned them. Everything that I could carve out, and then I combined coils. And in this is some of the ashes that I collected. So by the act of covering up with the paper coils is thinking about kind of honoring them and protecting the tree. Bob Erickson, Deep in the Woods. The American writer Wendell Berry wrote, "You don't know who you are until you know where you're from." This sense of place is critical to my work. I've always made images from my immediate surroundings, an attempt to understand one's environment as a basis to understand others. In Wisconsin, where I taught for 25 years, it was the glacial terrain of central Wisconsin. Now, the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York is home. Created in eastern upstate New York in 1892 as one of the first forever wild forest preserves in the nation, the Adirondack Park is a unique wilderness area and National Historic Landmark. At 6 million acres, larger than Yellowstone, Everglades, Glacier, and Grand Canyon National Parks combined, it is the largest publicly protected area in the contiguous United States. Every day I wake up and stare dutifully out the back windows of our house. Today, the fog is dense and not much is visible. As the sun rises and the fog burns off, everything changes. The dense array of middle-aged white and silver birch and young, delicate hemlocks juxtaposed with their massive ancestors become visible. Ferns of all types, Japanese knotweed, coltfoot, and decaying beech logs fill the understory. The trees are illuminated, but their bark becoming more detailed, revealing burrows and fissures. Branches of all sizes and shapes lay on the sandy soil from yesterday's storm. The water in the rocky brook alongside our property moves quickly. The next artist is Kevin Giese. Murmur evolved over several years to gain its present form. They started small 3-foot, and the head section was solid. That caused a problem with the heads splitting open. Those were titled Silent Boys. So I was actually thinking about making some wooden duck decoys where you cut the block of wood in half and hollow it and glue it back together. So when I decided to change the form of Murmur, instead of the duck decoys, I put my time into making the heads for Murmur, and I made them nearer to adult human scale. They were given slits for eyes. They became carved trees referencing humans. The one reads something to say the forest, the trees, the rivers, lakes, and the sky, myself, marginalized people, we all have important stories. From reading Buddhist and Taoist texts, nature writings from naturalists of all walks, years of dream work, I understand that we are nature. If we fall and die in the forest, we go back to the earth, like a tree. There is no difference. We are all energy and matter in some form, and always in a state of transformation. Is there a spirit? I'm comfortable saying I don't know. But with that, I'm open to the possibilities of whatever form that the word might represent. I collected the trees for pine forest in northern Wisconsin. Eventually, I settled on using white pine because of its stature and the wood carved so beautifully, smooth and easy and without splintering. I cut young standing dead trees that had grown tall and thin, reaching for the canopy in mature stands of white pine. The young ones eventually died because they couldn't reach the light. Along with the trees, I had collected sap from all different locations from northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, and locally, always on the lookout for pine and spruce that exuded sap. I even took a trip west partly for the reasons of collecting sap in the Black Hills, where from a previous trip, I had noticed it plentiful on the big spruce trees. It was kind of fun, as most collecting is. Each piece is made from one intact tree. I clipped the small limbs and carved a channel where the pith had been. When I pressed warm sap into that channel to represent a circulatory system, I carved the sap flush to the wood, and then with a propane torch, I went it over quickly in order to make the sap shiny. That was the finishing touch, which made each tree more beautiful in its own way. When I graduated from art school, I decided to use landscape as subject matter. First as a painter, drawer, which I continue to do so, then sculpture. And then I learned about native wood species while practicing traditional hand woodworking techniques. And I started making furniture, which I still work at. And it's actually my main studio practice.
I do want to say thank you for inviting me to be a part of this show and inviting me to discover this gorgeous museum here in South Dakota. It's been wonderful meeting the people that I met tonight that are involved with it. And I truly love the museum. So I've been working with elements of nature all of my artistic career. I grew up in a family for which nature was the central element by which we interacted. Every single vacation was around camping or going to the cabin. All we ever talked about was nature, what a tree was, what tree it was, what that bird was, what the weather was doing in relation to what the animals were doing, the tree that fell down, the tree that didn't. And so trees are near and dear to my heart, and I have had them in my practice what seems like forever. For this presentation, I just put together several pieces over a variety of years that directly relate to trees, since this show is about trees. And so this particular piece, I mean, I don't know, quite a while ago. It was made from a rotting birch log on at the family cabin. And at the time I was interested in how to shape knitting, and a lot of the work that I do use knit wire. And so and I see things when I look at elements of nature that I find, and I thought, well, this could be a coffee pot. So this is knit out of silver and copper wire, and I call it silver birch coffee pot. And it is in the collection of the Minnesota Historical Society. I'm hoping, yes, okay. So this piece, which I call My Father's Religion, grew from the desire to knit trees. And as I was knitting these trees, I thought about the experience of what it was like walking in the woods with my father. It came from a conversation I overheard that my mother was having with a friend who had said that she was upset because my father didn't want to go to church. And my mother said to her friend that my father's church was in the woods. And so that's where I came with this concept of My Father's Religion. That tree that has black splotches on it that you can see, here's more of a detail of it, has a poem that I wrote from knitted wire that I call script about the experience of walking in the woods with my father. From that experience, so part of my art practice is every day I walk along the path along a creek and a lake that is right by my house where I live in urban Minneapolis. And I'm always picking up elements of nature, noticing what I'm drawn to, and so forth. And I wanted to integrate some of my art into where I was walking. And so these are 3 little knit trees that I hung for a while in what I called an experimental private-public art practice. And so those are 3 trees in the winter. Along the same path, one of the events that happened one year was some major flooding that uprooted trees that had been buried deep in the creek. And this flooding was the result of climate change. And so I decided to make a series of work that was called Human Intervention, or Natural Disaster and Human Intervention. And this was one of those pieces. So what I like to do is integrate textile techniques and elements into these forms that I find. This is a detail of another one, which is here. And for this particular piece, this was the first piece I did. I took the log home and embellished it and then brought it back to its original setting for a little while. I don't leave things out because people destroy them or take them. And then this was part of a piece that was called Natural Selection and Adaptation. It is based on buckthorn roots that the Minneapolis Park Board was removing because they are an invasive species. So while walking along my daily path, I collected these black, beautiful buckthorn roots and turned them into this. And then I think this is the last image, yes. And I only had 5 minutes, so I made things short. This is part of an ongoing body of work that I call Collaborations with Nature. All of these pieces were selected again from when I was out walking, particularly for the presence of other animals. So I consider them to be a collaboration with these other animals. There's the presence of boring beetles. There's the presence of worms that have burrowed through pieces. And some of the elements are simply erosion. And so I collect these pieces and bring them home and let them speak to me and add whatever it is to them that is textile related to me. The next artist that you're going to hear about today is Mary Hood, who is not here. And so even though I'll be reading this as if it's in the first person, all of the words are hers. She says, trees are a part of our life stories and serve as a reminder of our interdependence with the natural world. We need trees for survival, just as we need water and air. The Overstory by Richard Powers masterfully crafts the threads, the connections between us by offering stories of that part. Okay, generations and stories that live in the moment. This book, along with The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Vollenben, were the books that I was reading when the COVID pandemic hit the world. I don't know if you've all read them, but those are immensely popular books that everybody I know has read them, I think. And so Mary says that she found herself contemplating the role trees play in her own story, the vital importance of shade in Arizona, the provider of food, the stabilizer of the ground from erosion, and the endless variations of colors, textures, and patterns. While traveling back to Wisconsin from Arizona in March of 2019, I was comforted by the familiarity of the trees, especially the trees that I had previously noticed during my many stops at dog parks along the way. From the graceful Palo Verde, ficus, and pine in Arizona, to the massive white oaks in Nebraska, the maple and the oak in Wisconsin, and the sturdy beech nut in my backyard, the trees gave me great comfort and reminded me of stability and strength in a time of uncertainty. Beginning in 2019, Mary says she turned her creative energy to her recent series of large format etchings to reflect on pandemic realities throughout the lens of what we can learn from trees. Using trees metaphorically, I am exploring the realities of loss, isolation, interdependence, rebirth, strength, stability, and community. The series has a total of 12 etchings, 24-inch diameter plates, and using methods such as a monotype and/or sheen collé, and mixing and/or re-etching into plates, I created variable editions on 30-inch square paper, yielding over 100 unique impressions. I used the laser engraver to vaporize spray paint off copper, thus creating a mask with traditional intaglio techniques, such as aquatint, soft ground, and line etch could be applied. Each impression, though originating with a singular plate, has many variations, just as the seed once planted grows trees that are at once individual yet part of a larger community. Marjorie's coming up next, but I'm going to cheat because I left out one critical aspect of my talk, and that is that my work centers around themes of ecology and evolution, and I collaborate constantly with my son and daughter-in-law who are ecologists and environmental biologists, and I just need to credit them because they collaborated with me on the piece in the show called Cytoskeletons. And with that, it's Marjorie.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. And just want to say it's an honor to be represented upstairs in the beautiful gallery amongst all these wonderful artists that I've had this experience with. And with that, I'll start my talk. So we are all branches on a family tree. We don't get to choose the species we belong to. We sprout from roots of generations of traits, much like each acorn holds qualities of the mother tree. And my brown eyes and brown hair are from my mother's side of the family. My round nose and dimples are from my father's side of the family. Historic or epigenetic traumas are also passed from generation to generation. It is part of my DNA from both family trees. I process these emotional histories abstractly through my work. Like trees in the forest, my work often comes in multiples or spreads like a carpet of moss across a forest floor. The work acts as emotional or body stand-ins that represent significant events in my life. The act of creating art is a way for me to process the emotional memories of my past, like the death of the mother tree in the forest, opening up the crown for the sun to shine in. Young trees are allowed to flourish. The death of my parents has brought light to the fertile forest floor where I have set solid roots, opening a space for growth and understanding. Here is the original installation that you saw images from Rina's opening statement. It's at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. I want to point out that I didn't make this all by myself. For an open studio, about 80 people helped me roll over 7,500 yards of paper thread that went into making this. It took me about a year to create enough thread and the mechanics for hanging it and installing it. And Taylor and his staff did a fabulous job of recreating it in the space upstairs. And this is it in Milwaukee. So that's Alan helping me last year, a year ago, put things together, and that's me on the ladder hanging it. The space was had 13-foot heights for the ceiling, and so it was a much more intimate piece, as you see here. And now here it is in Brookings. I got confused because the next slide is so very different from what we've just been looking at. Currently, I'm working on an actual tree. In the spring of 2020 at our home, we lost a 75-year-old ash tree to emerald ash borer infestation. And every day when I go out with the dog, I walk by the space that tree used to stand in, and I still mourn that loss of this magnificent tree. The emerald ash borer, if you haven't heard, is an invasive insect. It's believed to have arrived on our shores in Michigan in 2002. So already 20 years it's been kind of working its way across the country. Just a little inside information. The insects lay their eggs on the bark. When they hatch and turn into larvae, they bore into the tree bark and create channels between the bark and the trunk of the tree, the mass of the tree. And that's called girdling, and it causes the tree to die within 2 or 3 years. When they turn into the insect of the emerald ash borer, they emerge through a D-shaped hole in the ash tree, and within about 5 years, the tree will die. So I've been working in Minnesota. Let's see if I forgot anything here. Nope, I'm going to keep going. In Minnesota, there are nearly 1 billion ash trees, and all are in danger of dying or being removed because of the invasion of the emerald ash borer. So I'm currently working on site at Silverwood Park, which is part of the Three Rivers Park District. It's north of St. Paul, Minnesota. And this is an ash tree that succumbed to the ash borer. And I'm working on that to create a replica of it in paper. What you're seeing here is actually a muslin pattern that I'm creating, and then I'll make paper that will wrap around the tree. So similar to what Rina does, but a little different. And that's the site with the beautiful tree. Winter's coming, so we're going to be moving it indoors soon. And there's a cast of that branch that you just saw. So, oh no, it isn't that branch, sorry. That's a cast, my first test. And I'd like to read this quote from Hermann Hesse. A tree says, "A kernel is hidden in me, a spark, a thought. I am life from eternal life. The attempt and the risk that the eternal mother took with me is unique. Unique the form and veins of my skin, unique the smallest play of leaves in my branches, and the smallest scar on my bark. I was made to form and reveal the eternity in my smallest special detail." And that's what I've got for me. But now I'm going to present John Schuerman's statement. What does a tree know? Well, it knows exactly what kind of insect is chewing on its leaves. It knows by the chemicals in the insect's saliva. The tree, let's say an elm, IDs a bug, maybe a leaf-eating caterpillar, and then sends pheromones across the meadow to the caterpillar's predators, a parasite wasp. In this way, the elm can limit the damage, which sounds really intelligent. Somehow, this tree keeps a large database of insect saliva, cataloging over time chemical traces of every critter who wanders by, even deer saliva. That elm tree may seem to just stand around doing nothing, but in fact, it is busy processing dynamic information from its environment around the clock. It's a sophisticated being that forms complex relationships with other forms of life in its ecosystem. And unlike you and me, a tree lives not in the moment, but in deep time. We can only imagine what deep time means to a tree and how it builds a collective mind that inhabits such a space. And that question has, in a way, motivated my artistic inquiry. And there you are.
So, so the collaborative project that John Schuerman and I started in 2020, we called it homologies. So homology is a term from biology, and it means the state of having similar structure or form between parts. especially across species that reflect a common ancestry. For example, the wing of a bat and the foreleg of a mouse and the forearm of a human are homologous. So in this project, we honor the simple beauty of sticks. We work slowly, contemplating, meditating, drawing, wrapping, and framing each unique yet related expression from trees across distant territories. We see that similarity of forms from stick to stick, and we create our own homologies. So each stick is replicated. John or I started with John. He, along his walks along the Mississippi River, would find the stick. And he would bring the stick to the studio and he would draw that stick at scale exactly the way he found them, with the dirt and everything, moss. And then he would then send me the stick and the drawing. And then I would clean the stick and then I would wrap them in my paper coil. But he lives in Minneapolis. And at that time, I was in Arizona. So the way that we could do our collaborative project was that he will send me the sticks. So these are 3 sticks from Minneapolis, and along with the drawings in a tube or sometimes in a box. And then I would do my coils, and then I would share with him, you know, with emails or text, this is what we have. So we've been sending things back and forth for over a year. So the left, this image is, it's always really wonderful to just receive a tube or a box and just unroll the drawings. And so we also talked about like how long it took for him, John, relatively, to draw each stick. And he asked me how long it takes for me to clean and wrap with the coils. And it turned out that they're very similar in the amount of time we spend. And we share our time together and we share our experience together. So in many ways, we became homologous. Then because I was in Arizona, I'm beginning to notice that the plant forms, the tree forms are quite different from the forms that you would find in Minnesota. So then I started looking. So on our daily walks, instead of looking out, I'm looking down, looking for some objects, sticks to pick up. So this is a branch from Ocotillo. So it's a cactus family. And I was very drawn to this shape, but also I'm always driven by curiosity. So I'm a printmaker, but everything I do is always based on, oh, I haven't done that. You know, what if I do this? So it is the curiosity. So I've been wrapping paper coils on objects. I've gotten quite good at it. But what do you do when you have this thorny ocotillo. Like, I can't wrap that. So I tried, and then ended up on the right. So if you look at the piece closely, you will see those thorns. I'm wrapping around the thorns, and that creates its own form. So it's the object that tells me how to respond to that. So these, the Arizona sticks, so ocotillo, creosote, and juniper from Sedona. And these are the sticks from Minnesota. John didn't know what trees they came from. The one in the middle, the texture, when I received it, was really, really beautiful. The pattern was really beautiful. And John said they were beaver teeth marks, because in the wintertime they go hungry and they chew on. So I didn't want to cover it up. So that meant I was doing my coiling, and then I peeled it back to reveal that beautiful texture that these the animals made. Since then, our project evolved, and we started talking about living trees and oldies trees. So this was last year, actually, when John came for the opening of When Trees Dream show at BTG Gallery in Milwaukee. He sent me an email saying, there's an oldies tree in Milwaukee, and it's about 5 miles from the gallery. Before the reception, do you want to walk there together? So I'm teaching right up to that point, and then I have to walk 5 miles and have to walk 5 miles back, and then we have a show. So I said, sure. So we walked. It turned out that it was not the oldest tree in Milwaukee. So, but it was a beautiful tree. And so then John went home back to Minnesota and said he found an oldest tree in Minneapolis. And then he later found out there is an oldest tree in Milwaukee, and that by then it was a winter. And of course he asked me, I'm coming to Milwaukee, would you like to walk to that oldest tree by the lake? It's a white oak. So I said, seriously? And said, sure. So we did. We bundled up, we went, we tried to locate this tree, and then we found the stick. So I'm working on that now. Then I went to Arizona, 2022, and found oldest mesquite tree in the entire state of Arizona. And luckily, it is preserved. So has a history. There's a plaque that talks about how old that tree is. And so it touches me that people who really realize the significance of this tree, and in its own, the branches are like touching the ground and it's forming back up, and they walled it off like this. And here's me right here eyeing for a tree branch. Looked around, nobody was around. I didn't jump. I sent my husband to jump, and he found me a stick, but don't tell anybody. So I'm going to end with this quote. A tree's most important means of staying connected to other tree is a wood-wide web of soil fungi that connects vegetation in an intimate network that allows the sharing of an enormous amount of information and goods. We learn so much from nature. Nature teaches us to honor the earth we inhabit. Trees are speaking to us, always. We may choose to ignore what they say, but the 7 artists in this show, When Trees Dream, have decided to listen, and listen carefully. Thank you so much.